In 1934, Frank Lloyd Wright was 67 years old and nearly forgotten. Critics called him a has-been, a 19th-century relic. His last major commission had come over a decade earlier, and the Great Depression had starved what remained of his practice. The Museum of Modern Art had recently dismissed him as only half modern. Most architects his age would have accepted defeat. Then a phone call changed everything. A wealthy Pittsburgh merchant wanted a weekend house in the Pennsylvania mountains. Nothing unusual, except Wright had procrastinated for 9 months without producing a single drawing. When the client announced he was driving over to see the plans, Wright sat down at his drafting table and reportedly sketched the entire design in roughly 3 hours. What emerged would become the most celebrated private residence in American history: Fallingwater, a house that appears to float above a 30-foot waterfall. Concrete terraces cantilevered into thin air. Stone walls rising from ancient boulders. A structure so daring that engineers warned it would collapse, so beautiful that it landed right on the cover of Time magazine. But Fallingwater was more than an architectural triumph. It was a story of immigrant ambition, artistic rebirth, family tragedy, and a building that nearly destroyed itself. The terraces began cracking before the paint had dried. The concrete sagged for decades. Only a multi-million-dollar rescue in the 21st century saved it from ruin. Today, Fallingwater stands as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The American Institute of Architects named it the best all-time work of American architecture. More than 6 million people have walked its cantilevered terraces since it opened to the public in 1964. This is how a forgotten genius and a department store fortune created the house that defied gravity. Chapter 1: The Kaufmanns of Pittsburgh. In 1868, a 19-year-old German farmer's son stepped off a ship in New York Harbor with little more than ambition. Jacob Kaufmann had left the village of Viernheim seeking something America promised but rarely delivered. Within 3 years, he would prove the promise real. Jacob sent for his brother Isaac, and together they opened a small tailor shop at 1916 Carson Street in Birmingham, a working-class neighborhood on Pittsburgh's south side. The year was 1871. Their initial investment totaled $1,500. The shop measured 17 feet by 28 feet. They called it J. Kaufmann and Brother. That first year, they recorded sales of $21,585, enough to fund more passage from Germany. Morris arrived in 1872 at 14 years old. Henry followed in 1876 at 16. 4 brothers, none yet 30, running a growing business in a city that ran on steel and coal and immigrant labor. The Kaufmanns understood something their competitors did not. Department stores were changing American retail. Fixed prices replaced haggling. Merchandise sat on open display rather than hidden behind counters. The brothers caught this wave early. By 1890, they had moved to a prime corner at Fifth Avenue and Smithfield Street in downtown Pittsburgh. A bronze 4-faced clock stood outside, and locals began saying what they would say for generations: "Meet me under the Kaufmann's clock." Within 2 decades, hardscrabble peddlers had become Gilded Age millionaires. Edgar Jonas Kaufmann entered this world on November 1st, 1885, the eldest son of Morris. He attended Shadyside Academy, Pittsburgh's elite preparatory school, then enrolled at Yale University. After graduation, he trained in retail management in Germany and Paris before returning to open a small general store in Connellsville, Pennsylvania. In 1909, he joined the family business as a shipping clerk. That same year, he married. His bride was Liliane, daughter of his uncle Isaac. First cousins could not legally wed in Pennsylvania, so they traveled to New York for the ceremony. The union merged 2 branches of the Kaufmann fortune and produced 1 child, Edgar Jr., born in 1910. Edgar Sr. rose quickly. By 1913, at 28, he had acquired controlling interest and become president of Kaufmann's department store. The business employed 3,000 people. Over the next 7 years, he tripled annual sales from $10 million to $30 million. He commissioned murals depicting the history of commerce, renovated the ground floor in French Art Deco style, and transformed Kaufmann's into something more than a store. It became a cultural institution. Liliane matched her husband's ambitions. In 1933, she reinvented the store's 11th floor as the Vendôme shops, named for the elegant Parisian square. One half offered designer fashions from New York and Europe. The other displayed antiques, crystal, and jeweled boxes. Pittsburgh's society pages called her the city's smartest dressed woman. But the Kaufmanns faced boundaries that wealth alone could not breach. As Jews in 1930s Pittsburgh, certain doors remained closed. Country clubs excluded them. Social registers overlooked them. They responded by building their own world of artists, architects, and intellectuals. When Albert Einstein visited Pittsburgh in December 1934 for a scientific conference, the Kaufmanns hosted him at their Fox Chapel estate. Edgar, who spoke German, served as the physicist's interpreter. The smoky air of industrial Pittsburgh offered other reminders of their limitations. Steel mills darkened the sky. Soot coated every surface. The wealthy escaped when they could, boarding trains for the Laurel Highlands southeast of the city, where mountain streams ran clear and forests blocked the haze. The Kaufmanns found their refuge at Bear Run, a rushing creek in Fayette County. For years, the property had served as a summer camp for store employees, complete with cabins and a clubhouse. When workers stopped using it, Edgar and Lillian purchased the land in July 1933 and built a modest cottage for weekend retreats. They fell in love with one spot above all others, a flat boulder beside a waterfall where the family would picnic and sunbathe, listening to water crash over ancient rock. Edgar often rode horseback through the surrounding forest. Lillian painted, their son explored. None of them imagined what that boulder would become. Chapter 2. A Genius Written Off. Frank Lloyd Wright was born on June 8, 1867, in Richland Center, Wisconsin. His father William was an itinerant preacher who would abandon the family 18 years later. His mother Anna decided before her son could walk that he would become an architect. She hung prints of European cathedrals in his nursery. After brief studies at the University of Wisconsin, Wright left for Chicago in 1887. He joined Adler and Sullivan, the firm behind some of America's first skyscrapers. Louis Sullivan became his mentor. By 1893, Wright had opened his own practice. Working from a studio attached to his Oak Park home, where he lived with his wife Catherine and their 6 children, Wright developed what critics would call the prairie style. Low horizontal rooflines echoed the Midwestern landscape. Open floor plans rejected Victorian compartmentalization. Ribbons of windows blurred the line between inside and out. Between 1900 and 1910, he built roughly 50 prairie houses. The Frederick Roby House in Chicago stood as the style's peak. Architecture journals celebrated him as the most original designer in the country. Then he walked away from all of it. In 1909, Wright left his wife and 6 children for Mama Borthwick Cheney, a married client. They fled to Europe while Chicago newspapers ran the scandal on front pages. When Wright returned in 1911, few clients would hire him. He retreated to Wisconsin, to land his Welsh ancestors had settled decades before. On a hill overlooking the Wyoming Valley, he built a new home and studio called Taliesin, Welsh for shining brow. On August 15, 1914, while Wright worked in Chicago, a servant named Julian Carleton bolted the doors, set the building ablaze, and attacked those fleeing with a hatchet. 7 people died, including Mama and her 2 children. Wright rebuilt Taliesin. A second fire struck in 1925. He rebuilt again. His marriages fared no better. A second wife, the sculptor Miriam Noel, proved unstable. They divorced in 1927. The following year, he married Olgavana Lazovic, a Montenegrin dancer 30 years younger. She would stay with him until his death. But work had vanished. A resort hotel planned for Arizona collapsed with the stock market in 1929. The economic crisis that followed shut down architecture firms across America. Wright survived on lecture fees and selling Japanese prints from his collection. In 1932, the Museum of Modern Art mounted an exhibition on modern architecture. The curators celebrated Le Corbusier and Mies van der Rohe. They included Wright only as a historical footnote, a precursor whose time had passed. That same year, Wright and Olgivana opened Taliesin to paying apprentices. $550 bought a year of living and working alongside the master. Critics called it a vanity project. Wright also published his autobiography, arguing for an organic architecture, where buildings grew from their sites like plants from soil. The book sold poorly. By 1934, Wright was 67. He had not completed a significant structure in years. He spent his days sketching utopian city plans no one would build. Then a Pittsburgh merchant called about a weekend house. Chapter 3: The Apprentice and the Commission. Edgar Kaufmann Jr. had little interest in selling merchandise. Born April 9, 1910, he showed early talent for painting and drawing. His parents recognized this and sent him abroad. He studied at the School for Arts and Crafts in Vienna, then moved to Florence for 3 years of training in typography and painting under the master craftsman Victor Hammer. He returned to Pittsburgh in his early 20s, uncertain what to do with his education. The department store held no appeal. In the summer of 1934, a friend recommended Frank Lloyd Wright's autobiography. Edgar Jr. obtained a copy and read it in days. Wright's arguments hit him directly. Buildings should grow from their sites. Architecture should serve human life, not dominate it. Nature and structure could merge into single unified works. These ideas gave shape to instincts Edgar Jr. had never been able to articulate. He wrote to Taliesin requesting a visit. On September 27, 1934, he arrived in rural Wisconsin and met the 67-year-old architect. Their conversation lasted hours. By October 15th, Edgar Jr. had paid his tuition and joined the Taliesin Fellowship as an apprentice. Life at Taliesin bore little resemblance to a traditional school. Apprentices woke early. They cooked breakfast for the community, then spent mornings in the drafting room working on Wright's projects. Afternoons meant farm work, construction, or maintenance. They hauled stone, mixed concrete, tended crops. Wright believed architects should understand materials through their hands, not just their minds. Evenings brought communal dinners where Wright held court, telling stories, critiquing work, expounding on philosophy. The apprentices paid $550 yearly for this privilege. They received no degrees, no credentials. What they received was proximity to Wright himself, watching him sketch, hearing him think aloud, learning to see buildings as he saw them. Edgar Jr. stayed 6 months. The work suited him, but he would not become an architect. By spring of 1935, he had returned to Pittsburgh to manage home furnishings at Kaufmann's department store, a role that let him apply his design sensibilities without abandoning the family enterprise. But during those months at Taliesin, he had written letters home filled with enthusiasm for Wright and his ideas. He described the buildings, the landscape, the communal life. His parents grew curious. Edgar and Lillian Kaufmann drove to Wisconsin on November 16, 1934. They spent the day touring Taliesin, walking the grounds, examining Wright's earlier work in photographs and drawings. Wright proved a charming host. He shared their interest in art, their appreciation for craftsmanship, their belief that good design could elevate daily life. During dinner, conversation turned to the Kaufmann's property in Pennsylvania. They described the wooded hills, the rushing stream, the modest cottage that no longer satisfied them. Wright listened carefully. Before the visit ended, the Kaufmanns had invited him to see the site for himself. Wright arrived in Pittsburgh on December 18th. Edgar Sr. drove him southeast through the Laurel Highlands to Bear Run. They walked the property together in winter cold, their breath visible in the mountain air. Edgar showed Wright the family's favorite spot. A broad, flat boulder jutted over the stream, just above where water tumbled over rocks in a small cascade. The family gathered here on summer weekends to swim, sunbathe, and picnic. Edgar assumed any new house would sit downstream with a clear view of this beloved feature. Wright studied the boulder, the water, the surrounding hemlocks and rhododendrons. He took photographs. He made measurements. He asked questions about the stream's behavior in different seasons, about flooding, about the rock formations beneath the soil. He offered no opinions about where a house might go. He made no sketches in front of his client. He simply observed, storing details that would emerge months later in a design no one expected. Wright returned to Wisconsin. The Kaufmanns waited for drawings. None arrived through winter, none through spring, none through summer. 9 months of silence. Chapter 4. 3 Hours of Genius. For 9 months, Wright produced nothing. No sketches, no floor plans, no elevations. The Kaufmanns wrote letters inquiring about progress. Wright replied with vague reassurances. He had visited the site only once, in December. Now it was September of 1935, and the client had seen nothing on paper. Wright claimed he was thinking. The design existed in his mind, he said, gestating until ready to emerge complete. His apprentices suspected otherwise. They had watched him procrastinate on other projects. They knew his debts, his difficulties, his habit of delaying until external pressure forced his hand. The pressure arrived on September 22nd. That morning, Edgar Kaufmann Sr. telephoned Taliesin from Milwaukee, roughly 140 miles away. He was driving to Wisconsin, he said. He would arrive by lunchtime. He wanted to see the drawings for his house. Wright hung up and walked to the drafting room. His apprentices watched as he sat down at a table already set with the topographical map of the Bear Run site. According to Edgar Tafel, one of those apprentices, Wright picked up a pencil and began to draw. The design emerged in a continuous flow. Wright sketched the main floor first, positioning it directly above the falls rather than downstream facing them. Concrete terraces extended outward from a central stone mass, cantilevered over the stream without visible supports. A second floor sat above with its own projecting terraces. A third level topped the composition. Wright narrated as he drew. "Lillian and EJ will have tea on the balcony," he told the apprentices. "They'll cross the bridge to walk in the woods." He described the spaces as if the family already lived there, as if the building had existed for years. Pencils wore down. Apprentices sharpened replacements. Wright erased, redrew, refined. He added a staircase descending from the living room directly to the stream below. He positioned the main fireplace around a rock outcropping that would remain in place, rising through the floor. By the time Kaufmann's car pulled into Taliesin, roughly 3 hours had passed. Wright met him with drawings in hand. The plans bore a title, Fallingwater. Kaufmann studied the design in silence. Then he spoke. "I thought you would place the house near the waterfall, not over it." Wright had anticipated this reaction. He had spent 9 months considering how to answer it. The Kaufmanns loved that spot beside the falls. They had shown it to him with pride. Any conventional architect would have positioned the house to face it, to frame it as a view. Wright wanted something more. "I want you to live with the waterfall," he told Kaufmann, "not just to look at it. I want it to become an integral part of your lives." A house downstream would reduce the falls to scenery, something glimpsed through windows. A house above the falls would make the sound of water constant, felt rather than observed. The family would hear it in every room. They would descend stairs to touch it. The boundary between dwelling and landscape would dissolve. Kaufmann said little that afternoon. He took the drawings back to Pittsburgh to study with Lillian. Both had reservations. The design was radical, expensive, and structurally untested. They consulted engineers who questioned whether cantilevered concrete could span such distances safely. But something in the drawings held them. The terraces floated like natural ledges. The stone walls rose from the site as if they had always been there. Wright had not designed a house that sat on the land. He had designed one that grew from it. By January of 1936, Wright's team had completed detailed construction drawings. They differed little from those first sketches made under deadline pressure on a September morning. The Kaufmanns approved the plans. Now someone had to build them. Chapter 5. Building over the Falls. Ground broke in April of 1936. The drawings that had taken Wright 3 hours to sketch would take 2 years to realize in concrete and stone. Wright hired Walter J. Hall, a contractor from northern Pennsylvania, to oversee construction. Hall had experience with difficult sites, but had never attempted anything like this. Few contractors had. The plans called for concrete platforms extending 15 feet beyond their supports, hovering above rushing water with no columns beneath them. Local laborers did the work. Men from the surrounding hills, many with little construction experience, earned between 35 and 85 cents per hour, depending on their skills. They arrived each morning to a site accessible only by narrow roads through dense forest. Materials came from the land itself. In late 1935, workers had reopened an abandoned quarry on the property to extract sandstone. This local rock would form the vertical walls, its color and texture matching the natural outcroppings along the creek. Wright insisted on this connection between building and site. No imported stone would do. The horizontal elements posed greater challenges. Wright specified reinforced concrete for the balconies that would project over the water. Steel rods laid in crossed patterns would give the concrete tensile strength. The mixture itself combined cement, sand, and rounded river gravel scooped from the creek bed. Edgar Kaufmann trusted Wright's vision, but not his engineering. He hired a firm of consulting engineers to review the structural calculations. Their report arrived with warnings. The steel reinforcement Wright had specified was insufficient. The concrete spans were too ambitious. The balconies would sag, perhaps crack, possibly fail entirely. Kaufmann forwarded these concerns to Wright. The architect dismissed them. He had built cantilevers before. He understood the forces involved. The engineers were being timid, he said, applying conventional thinking to unconventional design. The argument escalated through letters and phone calls. Wright threatened to quit. Kaufmann refused to proceed without modifications. Hall, the contractor, found himself caught between an architect who would not compromise and a client who feared catastrophe. Hall made a quiet decision. Without informing Wright, he added steel reinforcement beyond what the drawings specified. When concrete was poured for the main balcony in August of 1936, it contained roughly twice the steel Wright had called for. Wright rarely visited during construction. He sent apprentices from Taliesin instead. Robert Mosher, a young member of the fellowship, supervised much of the daily work. He reported progress to Wright by letter and photograph, handling problems on site while the architect remained in Wisconsin. The arrangement bred frustration. Hall found Wright's absence convenient at times, infuriating at others. Design questions arose that only the architect could answer. Delays mounted. Costs climbed. By fall of 1937, the main house stood complete. The Kaufmanns moved in that October, 18 months after construction began. The three-story structure rose from the hillside exactly as Wright had drawn it, concrete platforms stepping outward above the creek, stone walls anchoring the composition to the earth. The following year, Wright designed a guest wing to accommodate the visitors who had already begun arriving to see the house. This addition sat into the hillside above the main structure, connected by a covered walkway. Construction finished in 1939. Total cost reached approximately $155,000, more than 4 times Wright's original estimate of $35,000. The Kaufmanns paid without public complaint. They had wanted something unprecedented. Unprecedented did not come cheap. What no one discussed openly was whether the engineers had been right to worry. The concrete had been poured. The forms had been removed. The balconies held. For now. Chapter 6. Living with the Waterfall. The Kaufmanns moved into their new house in October of 1937. What they found inside surprised them as much as the exterior. Ceilings hung low, some barely 6 feet 8 inches, compressing space to make the terraces beyond feel larger by contrast. Wright stood 5 feet 7 inches tall and designed for his own proportions. Taller visitors learned to duck. Rooms merged into one another without walls or doors. The main floor combined entry, living area, and dining space into one continuous volume. Stone rose from floor to ceiling in vertical masses. Horizontal planes of concrete and wood extended toward glass. The feeling was of shelter opening onto forest. At the center of the living room, a boulder pushed through the floor. This was the same rock where the Kaufmanns had picnicked for years before the house existed. Wright refused to remove it. He built the fireplace around it, letting stone emerge beside the hearth. The site remained present inside the building. A glass hatch in the living room floor offered something stranger. lift it, and a suspended stairway descended directly to the stream. The family could leave their living room and stand in rushing water within seconds. Looking at the landscape was not enough for Wright. He wanted the Kaufmanns to touch it. Corner windows met without mullions, the vertical supports that typically frame glass. Wright eliminated them so that views extended uninterrupted around corners. The windows opened outward rather than sliding up, keeping even the frames from blocking the forest. Only 2 colors appeared throughout. Wright specified a light ochre for concrete surfaces and his signature Cherokee red for steel. These tones matched the sandstone and autumn leaves outside. No wallpaper, no decorative paint, no deviation. Wright controlled the furniture as completely as the structure. He designed roughly 170 pieces, all built by the Gillen Woodworking Corporation of Milwaukee. The material was North Carolina black walnut. Built-in desks, shelves, and banquettes lined the walls. Freestanding tables followed the same angular geometry as the building. Wright called his built-in pieces client-proof. He bolted furniture to walls so the Kaufmanns could not rearrange it. Moving a table, he believed, would ruin the composition. The family accepted this. They had hired Wright to decide such things. Japanese design shaped the interiors. Wright had collected Japanese prints for decades, and he gave the Kaufmanns 6 woodblock works by Hiroshige and Hokusai when they moved in. Floor cushions called zabutons replaced conventional seating in several areas. The horizontal lines, the restraint, the framed views of nature all drew from architecture Wright had studied since the 1890s. The Kaufmanns added their own art. They collected from multiple cultures and periods. A painting by Diego Rivera hung in one room, a Picasso in another. Moroccan textiles, Mexican folk art, and Tiffany glass filled niches and shelves. Wright sometimes recommended pieces. More often, the family chose without him. Even the bathrooms showed his hand. He raised toilets more than 10 inches above standard height, believing a squatting position was healthier. Cork tiles lined the walls. Industrial shower heads let bathers feel they stood beneath falling water. The sound of the stream reached every room, not loud enough to drown conversation, but always present. A low murmur through stone and glass. Visitors needed hours to stop noticing it. The Kaufmanns said they never did. Chapter 7. Cracks in the concrete. The cracks appeared before the Kaufmanns moved in. In late 1936, workers removed the wooden formwork that had held the first-floor cantilever while concrete cured. Within days, thin lines spread across the parapet walls where the balcony met the main structure. Edgar Kaufmann demanded an explanation. Wright dismissed the concern. Concrete settled, he said. Hairline fractures were normal. And besides, if anything had gone wrong, it was because the contractor had added unauthorized steel against his wishes. Someone had meddled with his design. The cracks widened anyway. Over the following years, the outer edges of the balconies sank lower each season. The movement was slow but steady. By the time Edgar Sr. died in 1955, the main terrace had dropped roughly 4 inches from its original position. What no one fully understood at the time was creep. Concrete under sustained load deforms gradually, especially when reinforcement is inadequate. Wright had specified less steel than the spans required. The extra reinforcement added during construction helped, but not enough. The cantilevers were carrying weight they were never designed to bear. Humidity compounded the damage. The house sat above moving water. Mist rose constantly. Moisture penetrated the concrete, rusted the steel within, weakened the structure from inside. Critics called the place rising mildew. Flat roofs leaked after every storm. Wright had designed them without adequate drainage, favoring clean lines over function. The Kaufmanns placed buckets beneath drips and repainted surfaces that blistered. Maintenance became constant. Edgar Jr. inherited the house and stopped the annual structural surveys his parents had conducted. He trusted his maintenance chief to watch the terraces informally. The sinking continued unseen. In 1994, a graduate student at the University of Virginia measured the deflections for a thesis. His findings were alarming. The main balcony had sagged nearly 7 inches. Cracks had spread. The internal steel was yielding under stress. The Western Pennsylvania Conservancy, which now owned the house, hired engineers to assess the damage. Their conclusion was blunt. The structure was not merely aging, it was failing. Visitors could feel the problem. The balconies flexed beneath their feet. One longtime guide compared the sensation to standing on a diving board. What appeared solid in photographs moved with each step. Wright had called Fallingwater one of the great blessings to be experienced on Earth. That blessing was slowly tearing itself apart. Chapter 8: The Cover of Time. In January of 1938, newsstands across America displayed the same face. Frank Lloyd Wright stared from the cover of Time magazine, 70 years old, white hair swept back, eyes sharp beneath heavy brows. Behind him floated a drawing of the house above the falls. The headline called Fallingwater his most beautiful job. 6 years earlier, the Museum of Modern Art had treated Wright as a relic. Now that same institution mounted an exhibition dedicated entirely to the Kaufmann house. Architectural Forum, the profession's leading journal, devoted an entire issue to his work, with Fallingwater on the cover. Photographs showed concrete shelves hovering above rushing water, glass walls opening onto forest, a building that seemed impossible. Critics changed their assessments. Lewis Mumford, writing in The New Yorker, declared Wright undoubtedly the world's greatest living architect. The man dismissed in 1932 as a 19th-century holdover had produced the most talked-about house of the decade. Clients followed the attention. Within months of the Time cover, Wright had more commissions than he could handle. The Johnson Wax Administration Building in Racine, Wisconsin, which he had begun designing in 1936, opened in 1939 to widespread praise. Its open workroom, lit by skylights and ringed by slender columns, confirmed that Fallingwater was no accident. More work arrived. The first Usonian house, an affordable design for middle-class families, went up in Madison, Wisconsin. A second Taliesin rose in the Arizona desert. Private clients lined up for homes bearing the Wright name. In 1943, Solomon Guggenheim asked Wright to design a museum for his collection of modern art in New York City. Wright spent 16 years refining the plan, a spiraling white cylinder that visitors would descend on a continuous ramp. The building opened in October of 1959, 6 months after Wright died at 91. The scale of his late career defied expectations. Over 70 years, Wright designed more than 1,000 structures. Roughly 500 were built. Nearly a third came after Fallingwater, completed when he was in his 70s and 80s. Ayn Rand noticed. Her 1943 novel, The Fountainhead, drew on Wright's persona for its architect hero, Howard Rourke. The book sold millions, spreading a romanticized portrait of the difficult artist to readers who would never enter one of his buildings. The Kaufmanns observed this transformation from their weekend house in the Pennsylvania hills. Visitors arrived uninvited, parking along the road, hiking through woods hoping for a glimpse. The family grew accustomed to strangers photographing their home. Wright designed the guest house partly to accommodate the curiosity his creation had sparked. Fallingwater had made Wright famous in a way his earlier work never managed. The prairie houses impressed architects. The Imperial Hotel in Tokyo survived an earthquake. But the house above the falls captured the public imagination. It photographed beautifully. It reproduced well in magazines. It looked like the future. That the house was already cracking mattered little to readers flipping through Time or Architectural Forum. They saw cantilevers floating over water. They saw stone rising from forest floor. They saw what Wright wanted them to see. The problems would wait. Chapter 9: Tragedy and Farewell. For 26 years, the Kaufmanns left Pittsburgh on weekends and holidays, driving southeast through the mountains to their house above the water. They swam in the pool Wright had designed. They hosted dinners on the broad living room floor. They slept with windows open to the sound of the creek below. The guest house, completed in 1939, allowed them to invite friends for extended stays. Frida Kahlo visited and reportedly seduced a fellow guest. Marcel Breuer came to study the construction. So did Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, whose glass towers in Chicago represented everything Wright rejected. They walked the grounds, examined the details, and left with their own conclusions. But the marriage at the center of this house was failing. Edgar Kaufmann had never been faithful. In 1933, the year before they commissioned Fallingwater, his affairs became public. A rival department store sued him for unpaid platinum and diamond bracelets he had sent to his mistress, a woman named Josephine Bennett Waxman. Pittsburgh newspapers published the details. Lillian said nothing. The pattern continued. Edgar traveled frequently and kept company with other women. Lillian remained at his side publicly, managing the Vendôme shops, hosting gatherings, performing the role of wife to a prominent man. She painted. She walked the forest paths. She sat on the boulder where the family had picnicked years before, now enclosed by the living room Wright had built around it. On September 7, 1952, Lillian Kaufmann died at Fallingwater. She was 63 years old. The cause was an overdose of Seconal, a barbiturate sleeping medication. Whether she intended to end her life or misjudge the dosage was never established. Her family did not discuss it publicly. Edgar buried his wife in a mausoleum on the property. The sculptor Alberto Giacometti designed the bronze doors. Less than 2 years later, Edgar remarried. His new wife was Grace Stoops, his secretary and longtime mistress. The wedding took place on September 4, 1954. He was 68. The marriage lasted 7 months. On April 15, 1955, Edgar Jonas Kaufmann died of bone cancer in Palm Springs, California. His body returned to Pennsylvania. He was placed beside Lillian in the mausoleum at Fallingwater. Their only child inherited everything: the department store, the properties, the art, and the house where both his parents now rested. Edgar Jr. was 45. He had never married. He lived in New York, working at the Museum of Modern Art and teaching at Columbia University. His partner, a designer named Paul Mayen, would remain with him for more than 30 years. Jr. visited Fallingwater when he could. He sometimes led tours himself, walking visitors through rooms he had known since childhood. At the end, he would ask what they thought of the house. Only then would he reveal that it had belonged to his parents. He understood that the property could not remain private forever. His father had known it too. Before his death, Edgar Sr. had discussed donating Fallingwater to an organization capable of preserving it. The question was which organization and when and under what conditions. Chapter 10: Saving Fallingwater. Edgar Kaufmann Jr. had watched other Wright buildings disappear, demolished, stripped of details, left to decay. By 1963, he understood that private ownership could not protect Fallingwater forever. On October 29th, he signed the deed transferring the house to the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy. He included 469 acres of woodland and a $500,000 endowment. "Such a place cannot be possessed," he said at the ceremony. "It is a work of man for man, not by a man for a man." The following July, Fallingwater opened for public tours. But the structural problems continued. By 1995, engineers confirmed the cantilevers were still moving. Without intervention, they would fail. The solution was post-tensioning. Engineers threaded steel cables through concrete beams and pulled them tight, halting further movement without altering the appearance. The project cost $11.5 million and took 6 months. When finished, the main terrace had risen half an inch, enough to stop the decline. "That sag is part of the story of the building," engineer Robert Silman said. Edgar Jr. did not see the restoration. He died in 1989 at 79. His ashes were scattered on the grounds, near his parents. In 2019, UNESCO inscribed Fallingwater on its World Heritage List. Maintenance continues. A $7 million restoration began in 2024, addressing leaks that have troubled the house since it opened. More than 150,000 visitors arrive each year. They walk through forest, round a bend, and see concrete floating above water. Wright was 67 when he sketched the design. His career had stalled. Critics had moved on. Fallingwater changed everything. The house remains, the water keeps falling,